Hello learners and welcome to this program. Today we will discuss on antimicrobial resistance. This forms a part of the course MEV004, that is Environmental Toxicology, and it forms a part of the program Postgraduate Diploma in Environmental and Occupational Health and Master of Arts in Environmental and Occupational Health. To discuss this topic, we have myself, Dr. Sushmita, and Professor R. Bhaskar from the School of Sciences. And we will see like the concerns, the definition of AMR, antibiotic resistance, the roots of the exposure, the mechanisms, and what are the action that has been taken at the national level and also WHO's strategic objectives. Now coming on to the point, what are anti-malarials or the antimicrobials? So these are basically agents that kill the microbes effectively and they can also inhibit their growth. This includes the antifungals, the antivirals, the anti-parasitics and also the antibiotics. Let us have a brief journey of the antibiotics. Now, in the early civilizations or in the ancient times, plant-based formulations and the herbal formulations were used for treating several infectious diseases. In fact, even for treating several diseases of the udder of the cow, the moon milk paste which comes and grows on the surface of the rocks in the caves and certain other subterranean regions, this paste was used to apply because this contained a large amount of the useful actinomycetes that was able to cure the disease causing germs. But after the modern era of the antimicrobials, like when did this occur? This began early in the 1900s and the creation of the salvarsan occurred in 1910, followed by the discovery of penicillin by Fleming. And it took a long time from 1928, from when the antibiotics was started to be produced in the laboratory and also in the industrial sector in large scale form, and this revolutionized the medical practices. So today if we are sick, we go to the doctor, he prescribes some medicine, some antibiotic, and that is able to cure our infectious diseases. So that is why we say that these antimicrobials or antibiotics, they are the magic bullets and they are able to save our lives even in the extreme conditions when we are having the stay in the ICU in the hospital. These magic bullets make the wonders. So what is the mode of action of these antimicrobials? Let us have a look into this. They enter an organism and they can bind to specific target sites. They block the important processes in the organisms that either kill them or they can stop them from further multiplying. The organisms have developed several mechanisms in order to resist the antimicrobial action, and that is known as the antimicrobial resistance. Now in this figure, you can see what are the ways and the mechanisms that this antimicrobial action can occur. So the microorganisms, they can prevent the access of any antimicrobial into their organism, into their system. They can remove the antimicrobial by using certain pumps that are present in the cell wall. They can destroy or inactivate the antimicrobial with some enzymes. So that means enzyme inactivation occurs over here. And then they can also change the antimicrobial target so that it cannot latch onto it. They can also develop new processes that avoid using the target of the antimicrobial, and all these resistance traits that have been developed by these bacteria, that can be passed on from one generation to another generation through the genetic elements such as the transposons, the phages or the plasmids, through the mechanisms like transformation, conjugation and also transduction. So these are the ways that these genetic elements can be transferred from organism to organism and also to the next generation. So where can antimicrobial resistance occur in? They can first occur in the bacteria, for example in Staphylococcus aureus. This causes very common skin infections. Then the viruses, They can cause, like they are caused by the influenza virus or the AIDS virus, the HIV virus, then the parasites like Plasmodium falciparum causing malaria, and then we have the fungal infections, the candida, which causes a lot of the fungal infections on the skin and so on. So the antimicrobial resistance can occur in the bacteria, in the viruses, in the fungi, and also in certain parasites, where no longer the action of these antimicrobial medicines, they will have any effect on these organisms. So that means we have to search and go in for new and novel varieties of the antimicrobial, which can then protect humanity from such biological disasters. So, Professor R. Bhaskar, can you please explain to our learners what is antimicrobial resistance and what are the potential drivers for this?
Okay, here it's very important for us to distinguish between antibiotic resistance and antimicrobial resistance. When we say antibiotic resistance, these antibiotics are used to treat bacteria, whereas when we say of antimicrobial resistance, in that case, it is all the microbes. As you have mentioned in your talk, it is bacteria, virus, fungi and parasites. So these all become resistant. This is a broad term. This is called as antimicrobial resistance. Now we will see what are the drivers for this to occur. Now what is the consequence of AMR? If you see, as a consequence of antimicrobial resistance, what happens is the drug is medicine is no longer effective, and this requires longer hospitalization of the patient, and sometimes this can be fatal also. And on an economic front, this can be costly to an individual, as well as in the systemic front, the whole overall health expenditure of the whole health system can go up, the expenditure budget can go up. So this is the implication of this. Now, is AMR a problem? Is this antimicrobial resistance a problem? It is a global health issue. And if you see who has classified the AMR as one of the top 10 global public health threats facing humanity. And in 2015, who took the declaration for this AMR problem? They formed the Global Action Plan on antimicrobial resistance. Now, what are the main drivers? You asked the questions. And the first one is naturally, due to the Darwinian evolution, all microbes try to survive, and this is a natural process. But what is more important is the human-made causes are accelerating the AMR which we are seeing. For example, there is lack prescriptions of antimicrobials. That means it is available over the counters, and it is easily it is easily distributed by pharmacy companies. So there is no strict regulations. So what happens if there is a small infection which can be treated with a lower dose of antimicrobial or lower strength of antimicrobial? If we take it indiscriminately, then the lower one will not function. So this is lax prescription is one of them. Second one is food imports. Whatever food we take, again, because we are having global production of food, industrial production of food, so antibiotics are used, and from food again we can get the antimicrobial resistance. Again, the world is an interconnected world, and all over you're seen in the COVID pandemic how the pandemic spread in a short time. And the same way, the microbes, the antibiotic resistance or antimicrobial resistance can spread between organisms. It can spread between generations. It can spread from animal to people, from environment to people. So this whole effect of wanderlust or connected world also adds to this. Then poor infection control. Suppose there is lack of vaccination, there may be infections which may be caused, and that may result in getting these kind of things. Then the other issue is, if you see, India is the largest consumer of antimicrobials, antibiotics, followed by China and US. And why it is so? We have a huge population, And India has the maximum AMR cases reported because we have a huge population density. Number of people living per unit area, square kilometer, is very high. So, the transmission and the AMR gets affected. Then another issue is the hygiene issue, lack of clean water, lack of sanitation, inadequate infection and prevention control. If we don't do this, then we will get infected. It is a better strategy to prevent the infection than to get the infection and treat it with antibiotics or antimicrobials. Then again, the issue of sewage and effluent also comes, whether it is from pharmaceutical industry or it is from hospital waste or any kind of industrial food production centers. You can have the antibiotics and antimicrobials going to the effluents. Then again, the chemicals used in home can also result in AMR. For example, we are using cleaning agents which can have antimicrobial ingredients. Now, what are the reasons in India that we are seeing this AMR? The first and foremost is poor quality of antibiotics. Second is clinical misuse. That means you go to a doctor and he prescribes the medicine. Sometimes it may be a viral infection, and if an antibiotic is prescribed without doing the diagnosis, proper diagnosis, then you are developing resistance to that by giving a wrong treatment. Then there can be over the counter accessibility of antibiotics. Then there is no lack of surveillance of antimicrobial resistance. This still is in infancy stage, and unless we do the surveillance, because this is a silent pandemic, and though COVID got the headlines because of the number of deaths and impact it had, AMR is a silent pandemic and it is already causing lot of damage. For example, as Dr. Sushmita Bhaskar mentioned, that during treatment it can fail, the infections may not cure. During surgical operations, during cancer chemotherapy, cancer treatments, we require strong antibiotics, or organ transplantation. All these require antibiotics, and if we do not take care of this, then we are at huge risk. Now, why is this a global concern? If you see, it is predicted that 10 million lives will be lost by the year 2050, and AMR could push 28.3 million people into extreme poverty by 2050. 1.2 trillion USD additional health expenditure per year is expected by 2050. You can see the financial loss. You can see how poverty can be caused by this. Now, one interesting question comes, is this antimicrobial resistance related to development of this, achieving the sustainable development goals? Directly you can see the AMR affects goal 1, 2, 3 and 8. What are those? No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being. Goal 8 is decent work and economic growth. All of you can easily correlate that if the health of the individual or the society is not good, then it will affect these. The fundamental goal, bedrock goal, is poverty, and if so many millions are pushed into poverty, the rest of the goals cannot be achieved. In fact, all these 17 sustainable development goals are strongly interlinked and they are interconnected, and it is very important that we try to achieve all of them. And even one issue like AMR, like COVID pandemic, pushed the achievement of all the 17 sustainable development goals. So AMR is in the similar category. Now I would ask Dr. Sushmita that what is the drug resistance situation in different microbes?
Thank you, Professor Bhaskar, for explaining the antimicrobial resistance and the drivers. Now, the present situation of the drug resistance in the bacteria and the other microbes. So now let us take the common bacterial infections which are occurring as a urinary tract infection or sexually transmitted diseases and also diarrhea and sepsis. So there have been reported high rates of resistance against the antibiotics that have been observed worldwide, and this is indicating that we are running out of the effective antibiotics. Now, in the same way, drug resistance to several of the drugs, this was noticed even in India, to the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, that which causes the tuberculosis. The World Health Organization, they estimated in 2018 that there were about 500,000 new cases of the rifampicin based resistant TB, and this is one of a very powerful drug which was used to treat the tuberculosis, and this has been identified globally, and vast majority of this multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, this is a form that is resistant to the two most powerful TB drugs. This anti-TB drugs, this has also been reported in several countries and also in our country. So this is a serious concern, because all the countries, especially India also, we strived for the no tuberculosis thing in our country, just like we have eradicated smallpox and polio. So this is a third, that TB also should be completely eradicated from the country. But now we are seeing that several of these strains are getting resistant, and they are not acting to any of the antibiotics that were once used successfully to treat infections. Now, what about in viruses? All the antiretroviral drugs, they are at risk of becoming partly or fully inactive because of the emergence of drug resistance and the drug resistant HIV. Now, the WHO's HIV drug resistance program, they are monitoring the transmission of the emergence of the new strains, and those that are developing the resistance to the older and also the newer HIV drugs globally. So this is also of concern, because when, as sir said, that when we are treating a patient with a certain drug, of course we have the first line of defense where we are using certain number of the antibiotics or the antimicrobials, and then we even have the last line of the drugs which are used to treat the patients. And here again we are finding that even in those drugs that are used in the last line of the defense, even to that also the microbes are getting resistant. So this is really of serious concern. It is challenging, and globally also we need multi-sectorial approach which has to be taken, and so that we can find a solution for this. In the same way, we are also finding the countries that are reporting drug resistance in the malaria parasite. The re-emergence of the drug-resistant parasites is of a great threat in order to control the malaria. So here we are finding world over large number of cases we are finding with dengue, with malaria, with the West Nile virus, and so many of the parasites are attacking. In the same way, leishmaniasis also. So many of the parasites are attacking the humans, the vector-borne diseases, and here again we have to take control of the situation when the antimicrobials are not, the parasites are not responding to any of these treatments. So the artemisinin based combination therapies, which were once used as a first line treatment for uncomplicated Plasmodium falciparum cases which causes malaria, for this also partial resistance has been reported in countries like Cambodia, in Myanmar, in Thailand and the Vietnam. Then it is not that we are observing drug resistance only among the bacteria, the virus and the parasites, but it's also reported among the fungal population and the fungi. So the drug resistant fungal infections are increasing. So many a time you would have seen that your body, you're developing certain pink rashes or red spots, and then you go to the chemist and you apply certain concoctions of these creams, but then you find no relief. There is still itching and irritation. So certain medicines which were once used to treat these fungal infections, now these the fungal strains are also getting resistant to these antimicrobials or the antifungals. So the drug-resistant Candida auris, which causes certain skin infections and dermatitis. This is one of the common invasive fungal infections, and it is widespread, and this is showing an increasing resistance to fluconazole, to amphotericin B, to voriconazole and caspofungin, which are some of the antifungals that are used to treat such diseases. Now let us have a look at some of the food products where the antibiotic resistance and the antibiotic residues have been reported. Let us see the antibiotic residues that have been found in the honey. So misuse of antibiotics has been occurring in the industrial sector quite a long time. This report was reported in 2010, that is 12 to 13 years back, in honey. The Center for Science and Environment, New Delhi, India, they tested several honey samples and they reported that these honey samples had antibiotic residues. Now, how did this come from? So the beekeepers were actually using the antibiotics in order to keep the beehives free of certain diseases. And also, these are also used as growth promoters in the industry. Now, the antibiotic residues are found in the dairy products like in milk products, and also in cheese. So these days, that is why we are concerned of knowing the source where our milk comes from. And here again in 2018, the Food Safety and Standards Authority, they tested several samples of the milk and the dairy products in India, and 77 samples, so it's not a small number, they had the antibiotic residues above the permissible limits. The milk in Rajasthan especially, they contained Staphylococcus aureus, which was resistant to gentamicin and tetracycline, two antibiotics that are used for treatment. Now, the antibiotic residues have also been found in the fruits and the vegetables. So just imagine that all our food products, whether it is milk, it is dairy, or it is a fruit and a vegetable, and then that they contain these antibiotic residues. And so this may also be one of the cause that these strains are becoming antibiotic or the antimicrobial resistant to the and the problem arises there. So this fruits and vegetables, the antibiotic residues have been reported in the United States, like streptomycin. These residues have been sprayed on the apple. Now, often the farmers lack the knowledge and they do not know the right proportion where the streptomycin or any other antibiotic has to be sprayed on the plant. So there is a right combination which has to be applied, and when they are using that liberally, and overuse or misuse of this can then allow the residues to be stored into the apple. And this is widely used in agriculture in order to protect the plants from the disease and other pathogens which are causing infections. Antibiotic residues are also reported in the eggs. So these days on the egg packets you would have seen that these eggs or the products what you have obtained or what you have bought, there is a sticker which is attached to it, and it says that the farms have organic feed, and the chicks were bred or the hens were bred with very healthy and nutritive food which was totally organic and which contained the natural feed. So these are important that even a consumer and a customer knows the source, from where your product comes from, and what are the ingredients that were provided to the animal when that was being reared for the production of the eggs. So the egg-laying hens are also given certain antibiotics for non-therapeutic purposes, and these residues make way to the eggs. So the residues of chlortetracycline, these were found in eggs in the farms in Tamil Nadu, especially in Namakkal. This was reported way back in 2014. The antibiotic residues, it's not that they were just found in fruit, vegetables or in eggs, but they have also been reported in the fishes and the aquaculture product. The Central Institute of Fisheries Education in Mumbai, they have reported enterobacteria species which were resistant to several antibiotics, and that is a serious cause of concern. The poultry farms, these are also a reservoir for the multi-drug resistant bacteria, and here in the poultry farm the litter is used as manure, and this manure will then be applied to the agricultural fields. So this multi-drug resistant E. coli, for example, this can be created in the poultry farm, and then when this manure is being applied to the agricultural field, let me tell you 70 to 90% of the antibiotics that are fed, it comes out also in the fecal matter. So from the manure, it is then going to the agricultural farm. Then from the agricultural farm, the bacteria can enter the groundwater, the river system, into the soil, and thereby it can affect the health of the agricultural workers and also the human health. So this was an account of where the antibiotics, the residues are found in the food products. Now, Professor Bhaskar, do we have any of WHO's strategic objectives that have to be addressed, and also the National Action Plan for the Antimicrobial Resistance, which our learners might be interested in knowing?
Okay. WHO has formed the vision, the strategic plan, and this requires multi-sectoral approach. If you see whose priorities are to lead global efforts, drive public health impact, promote R&D, and monitor AMR burden and response. It's a complex problem requiring multi-sectoral approach. They have formed 5 strategic objectives. If you see the slide number 1, the first one is improving awareness and understanding of AMR through effective communication, education and training. That means to promote awareness. Second point here is strengthening knowledge and evidence base through surveillance and research. That means new treatments, diagnostic tools and vaccines to be developed, studies on effective antimicrobials or alternatives. And the third strategy, if you see, is to reduce the incidence of infection. So you can avoid using so that antimicrobial resistance does not develop. The fourth, you can see the fourth strategy is to optimize the use of antimicrobials in human and animal health. It is very important. Sometimes they are indiscriminately used even in the agriculture sector, as Dr. Sushmita said, or in the poultry sector, or for animals. In addition to treating disease, they are also used as growth promoters. All these can cause so much disruptions in the system. So we have to use also legal and regulatory framework. The last one is sustainable investment and increased investment in new medicines, vaccines and diagnostic tools. All of you know, to make a vaccine, antibiotic takes a lot of time. You have seen in COVID how we suffered, and it took a long time, though a shortest time, but comparatively we lost many lives because vaccine formulation took some time. So you can see, to form antibiotics it takes a longer time, lot of investment. So different sectors of the society, stakeholders of the society should be involved: industry, government, public, everybody should be involved in this, just like the COVID. Now if you see in India, in 2017 we had the antimicrobial AMR action plan, and these are mirroring similar to, and they are aligned with the global action plan. The first 5 are almost the same. If you see, they are promoting, strengthening knowledge, reducing the incidence of infection, and if you see, the rest are all the same. Only here they have added, here main difference is strengthening India's leadership on AMR. So this is the action plan 17 to 22, and this is very important because India is taking a One Health approach for this. One Health approach means this we have to take care not only of the human environment, we have to also take care of the animal environment and the natural environment. If you see the national mission on biodiversity and human well-being which we have, this integrates all the different systems, and this says how One Health is very important. The government of India has also set up an expert group, a national expert group on One Health, and also decided to have a center for One Health in Nagpur. And this recommendation aligns with the WHO and European Union recommendations. One Health means we recognize that all these are interconnected, and we cannot tackle this alone. It is the humans, it is the animals and the environment, and this all has to be tackled at one place. It recognizes that the health and well-being of humans is closely interlinked with the health and well-being of the planet, the animals and other associated environmental issues. So these are the important thing that One Health approach has to be taken.
Thank you, Professor Bhaskar. I hope you have had a good understanding in this session, my dear learners, where we talked about the antibiotic resistance, antimicrobial resistance, the drivers for the same, and also some explained with some case studies, a few examples where the antibiotic residues have been found in the food products, and also the WHO strategic objectives, the National Action Plan for Antimicrobial Resistance Program. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.
the world's population has reached 8 billion on 15th November 2022. And we are still counting. I don't know where do we go from here. The predictions are scary. Any idea how many people can Mother Earth sustain? India's growing population is a serious concern, and we are soon going to become the world's most populous country. Wow, number one. Population is, after all, a human issue. The UN proposed Sustainable Development Goals cannot be achieved unless and until we consider the population dynamics. So, here we are. Indira Gandhi National Open University offers appreciation course on population and sustainable development. The course explores the linkages between population and sustainable development. In this course, there are diverse issues related to population, environmental safety, livelihoods, human health, migration, urbanization, and much more. The course duration is 3 months, but of course, you can complete it within a year. The eligibility of the course is graduation from a recognized university. So, if you are a development professional, working in a government sector, researcher, or keen to know more about the population and sustainable development, the course is must for you. Hurry up and join this course so that we are able to convert population into demographic dividend and not convert it into demographic disaster. For more information, visit www.ignou.ac.in. Thank you.
Namaskar. Welcome to this session of Gyan Darshan on the discipline of philosophy. This afternoon, our guest speaker is Dr. Sudhnya Kulkarni from Delhi University. Let me give a brief introduction of us. She is an associate professor of philosophy at Janki Devi Memorial College of University of Delhi. She is the nodal officer for open book examination since March 2020 in University of Delhi. She is also the teacher in charge of non-collegiate Women's Education Board's teaching center at Janki Devi Memorial College. She has published a book on Kant's political thought. She has recently published 2 research papers on philosophical implications of COVID-19 and women empowerment, opportunities and challenges for a national webinar held by SRM College, Rainar in Maharashtra. With that brief introduction, now I invite Dr. Sudhnya Kulkarni to deliver her presentation. She is going to speak on death penalty.
Thank you, Professor Nandini. And as Professor Nandini has mentioned, I'm going to be discussing about death penalty. But before we go on to talk about death penalty, I would like to touch upon punishment, because death penalty is also a punishment.
Yes.
So before we discuss what exactly is death penalty and its ramifications and repercussions and interpretations around it, I would like to talk about the perspective of punishment first. So when we talk about punishment, what is it that we exactly mean by punishment? Now, punishment is basically where someone who has violated certain social norms, which are, you can say, the generally accepted modes of conduct in a society, when those modes of conduct have been violated then the person who has violated invites punishment
Right.
or some kind of infliction of not necessarily physical injury, but some kind of an injury or penalty for the violation of those codes.
Yes.
Now, when we talk about punishment, there actually have been two main schools, or you could say perspectives within punishment. They have focused on the consequentialist perspective, and then what you have is called as the retributivist perspective. Now, the consequentialist perspective, and both of these perspectives from their own angles are trying to justify punishment and looking at why punishment is needed or required. So, when we talk about, say, the consequentialist punishment and the retributivist punishment, many a times it is believed that the consequentialist believe that the punishment, institution of punishment, or is justified. Why is it justified? Because it is something which yields consequences for the criminal who has gone on to violate certain norms of social behavior. And the argument is that if that criminal or the person, the violator, is not going to be punished, then it is not going to serve. It is not going to actually set an example in the society, and those violations will continue. So, in order to deter future criminals from indulging in those violations, the consequentialists talk about deterrence aspect too of punishment. Then they also talk about special deterrence, where you're looking at ensuring that the criminal will not indulge in any further offenses. Then added to that, they also have what is called as the rehabilitation perspective, where we may look at reforming the criminal by employing certain methodologies, whereby in future the criminal can be released into society and the violator can then probably assimilate into the society. So that is also another way of operation within the consequentialist perspective of punishment. And the consequentialist is interpreted as forward looking, because they are talking about punishing the criminal. And why forward looking? Because you are talking about stopping some kind of crimes from happening in the future. Now, so they base their justification of punishment on future results. As against the consequentialist perspective on punishment, you have what is called as the retributive aspect. Now, the retributive aspect is, retribution is literally, if you translate it, it's tit for tat, where you're wanting to take revenge in that aspect. It is termed as backward looking, because somewhere you are wanting to compensate the crime that has been committed. So the violator needs to be punished for the violation that he or she has done, and the survivor or the victim needs to be compensated for the crime that has been done against them. So the retributive perspective of punishment is often looked at or interpreted as backward looking. So punishment for the retributivist is basically, you can say, a response to law breaking, and therefore they believe that it is justified. Now, when you look at both these versions, whether it is consequentialism or whether it is retributivism, both of these responses have their challenges, and they both are fraught with difficulties. And many a time, if you look at the consequentialist perspective, we often will find that, the connection between crime and punishment, it's not a necessary connection, it's a contingent connection. And we punish the individual who's committed the crime, and the punishment has been given with this goal that it will stop in future further crimes of that kind or many other kinds. But Will that necessarily happen? Will that goal be actually achieved? Is a question that is, of course, goes into another domain altogether. Further, if we were to allow consequentialism as a way of punishment, where we are saying, okay, we want to deter and we want to refrain people from committing such crimes, then somewhere it may allow for certain abhorrent practices to come about as a method of inflicting punishment, be it torture, be it, punishing the family of the offender, be it could be, where you are deliberately going about framing innocent members of maybe the violator's family. There could be harsh penalties that are being implemented on those violators, and ensuring thereby that yes, the criminals will stop from indulging in those activities. But now the question that comes is, are we morally justified to be using such harsh methods to stop crime or to deter future criminal activities from happening? Now, the critics claim that consequentialism allows for, such practices. And consequentialism, the fact that it allows for such practices means it's morally permissible for them. Now, but as critics point out, that consequentialism violates one basic rule. And what's that basic rule? The fact that we are allowing for certain practices which in probably normal day-to-day in activities or interactions would appear to be abhorrent. But if you're allowing for those practices, then somewhere we are not respecting the individual or the persons. We are disregarding the inherent dignity and respect of the human being or of the person. So the critics actually state that the adult or the sane or the rational person has to be treated as an autonomous rational agent. And if you're not going to treat that individual as an autonomous, free, rational agent, but someone to be used as an object or someone to be used to set an example to stop further criminal activities from happening in future, then we have violated the most basic principle of human dignity. They're anti-consequentialists, so they critique this method of, punishment as a deterrent and even rehabilitation. Now, the consequentialists have basically responded to these responses by stating that the approach looks at justifying the goals and the desires and interests of every individual, because at the end we definitely have to stop criminal activities, and there has to be some method whereby we can ensure that everyone in the society is safe to go about pursuing their goals and maximizing the good, or to be able to carry on with their lives in a normal circumstance. So, and they further argue that this concept of respect for persons, it's a very wide concept. It's a very open and wide concept, in the sense that if we start trading on that ground, then we may end up going into deep, philosophical issues, which probably may not be covered in the domain of, punishment. So the consequentialists basically assert that their position on punishment is justified because it allows for the criminal to be punished, and it allows thereby for people to go about pursuing their goals, their desires, their activities, their interests, and they are able to maintain some kind of semblance, let's say, of normalcy in a society. As I had stated earlier, now the other aspect is the retributive aspect, or retributivism, which I had mentioned to you earlier, is called as the backward looking approach to punishment. Now, according to the retributivist, what is it that what is it that justifies punishment? Now, according to them, punishment is morally permissible. Why? Because of its beneficial consequences. Now, what would be the beneficial consequences? They argue that the criminals deserve that punishment. So their argument is based on desert. Okay, so they say that the criminal committed that crime, and that crime has to be compensated for. So, by not punishing the criminal, we are allowing that crime to be condoned. But how are we going to ensure? So, we are not going to set an example of the criminal by inflicting, difficult or, you could say penalties, but rather we are going to punish the criminal for the crime that has been committed. If you look at the perspective of retributivism from Kant, who was one of the most vocal, you could say, supporters of retributivism, and he used the term lex talionis, which talks about tit for tat, and where he said that, if you have to abandon a state, then the last murderer in the prison should also be executed. So that was the principle, that the murderer should not go scot-free, for the simple reason that murderer has violated the inherent dignity, rationality of a human being, which is something which is unpardonable. So for the retributivist, the criminals deserve to be punished. And it is often the case that the retributivists add that the amount of punishment that is justified has to be somehow relatable. It has to be relative to the degree of crime that has been committed. And it is, in other words, punishment must be proportional to the seriousness of the crime. Now, the retributivists therefore justify their punishment or their take on punishment, like I said, on the basis of desert. So, the criminals deserve the punishment that is being meted out to them. Now, there is a problem even for the retributivists, and that is that it appears to presuppose that giving people what they deserve is again morally justified. So the retributivists also have that problem, that yes, though you are arguing from the position of desert, of compensation, but is it that, can we actually morally compensate? It's not that, if someone has murdered somebody, you can actually go and murder that criminal. You can't. So can we actually go on to compensate and allow for this kind of moral justification? Now, another perspective of retributivism, which, like I mentioned earlier, has its roots in Rawls and Kant's theory, is that somehow they both argue that the criminal has willfully, voluntarily, willingly, rationally made that choice of what? Of violation, of violating a particular law. So when they violated that particular law, they actually knew about it, because they're not irrational creatures, they're rational creatures, and they have willingly, by violating, they have actually consented in some manner to be punished. So because further they are part of a social group, as they're part of a social group and they rationally agree to abide by the rules of that social group, then any violation of the rules of that social group will automatically invite penalties. So how can they then say that they don't deserve to be punished? Now, another version of retributivism argues that punishing the criminal, actually, it somehow, they argue, that corrects or nullifies. It somehow corrects or nullifies, the crucial moral truth that the offender and the victim are both entitled to equal respect. So if the criminal and the survivor or the victim are on the same plane and they both deserve equal respect, then by not punishing the criminal, we have actually disregarded the respect and the dignity of the victim or the survivor. So different versions, of course, of punishment have been given, and they all encounter difficulty. Now, when it comes to death penalty, death penalty or capital punishment, as the term is, proponents of death penalty, again, there are again two aspects or two kinds of perspectives vis-a-vis punishment, which is with regard to death penalty or capital punishment. So there are those who have argued for retention of death penalty, and they are known as retentionists. The retentionists have used both consequentialist approach as well as the retributivist approach to argue that why death penalty or capital punishment is justified. Those who are against Death penalty or capital punishment are called as abolitionists who have argued that why capital punishment ought not to be, ought not to be inflicted at all on anyone. Now, the consequentialist, or let's say the retentionists who are arguing, they argued that death is a superior deterrent. So, if we are going to look at deterrence as a way of stopping certain criminal activities from happening in future, then what further deterrence can there be as compared to death? If death penalty is instituted, is given, then for sure it will act as the greatest deterrent for any such heinous crimes from happening in future. The retributive approach is that that is the only penalty which is severe enough for, which somehow compensates for the crime and the degree of crime that has been committed. So the victim or the survivor is somehow compensated for the wrongdoing that has been done against them. Now, the abolitionists, or those who argue that no, capital punishment or death penalty ought to be removed or is not justified, now they have challenged both the arguments given by the retentionists, which is that of retributivism as well as that of consequentialism. Now, the reasons that they give are A, no doubt, death is a greater deterrent than life imprisonment. But they say nowhere do you find sufficient evidence that yes, death is a greater deterrent and it will prevent heinous crimes from happening in near future. So the abolitionists say that unless and until hardcore evidence is supplemented to justify that yes, capital punishment or death penalty actually stops or deters crimes from happening, it is not something which is to be vouchsafed for. Then the actual administration of capital punishment or death penalty, they argue, is many a times error prone. And if you take the example of the United States, they say it displays, a defective attitude and many a times towards human life. So they also argue, the abolitionists also go on to argue that many a times it so happens that you're deliberately going about killing a human being who has been served a sentence and who is already in jail, who's already imprisoned. That person is no longer in any position to harm another individual. When that person is already imprisoned and is no longer in a position to harm another individual, then why inflict death penalty on that individual? Those who are for capital punishment, they argue that, well, if we are not going to give death penalty or capital punishment for some heinous crimes, then it will amount to injustice, like I mentioned earlier, against the victim or the survivor. So their argument is that the worst possible crimes, they need death penalty. And they should receive the most severe kind of punishment. And what more severe can there be as against, death penalty? So we find that those who have argued for capital punishment or death penalty, the retentionists, they have used both the consequentialist approach as well as the retributivist approach to arguments to justify death penalty. The abolitionists have used procedural. They've used procedural arguments, and especially with reference to the American system, where they have actually gone on to state that death penalty for them is, they argue, is inflicted arbitrarily and without any kind of rational distinction. Then further they say that people are on death row for years together. So that itself is such a traumatic experience for the death penalty, server, the person who is on that row, death penalty row. And the method by which death penalty is inflicted is in itself, they say, a pretty barbaric practice. And they also feel that many a times, gender, class and racial bias comes in when death penalty is inflicted. So the abolitionists argue, and especially from the American system, perspective of the American system, they say that it is racially discriminatory. And so the other important argument that many a times the abolitionists take is they say that death penalty is actually, and I think it is a very important aspect of the argument, they say it is irrevocable. So if someone has already been given the death penalty and later we find that that person is individual, then there is no way of bringing that human being back because that person has already been given the death penalty. So the abolitionists argue that it is irrevocable. Because it is irrevocable, therefore one ought to tread very carefully and one should actually think of abolishing, death penalty or capital punishment. And they say further that there can be rare cases, where death penalty has been imposed on innocent victims or on innocent persons. Then if in such cases, if innocent persons have been inflicted or have been given death penalty and have been subjected to that, and later on one finds that yes, that person was innocent, that person is gone. How do you bring that individual back? Because it is irrevocable. Therefore, the abolitionists argue that we should try and do away with capital punishment or death penalty as a way of punishing crimes or criminals. So if you look at the arguments, we cannot say that either of the arguments are conclusive and they are wholeheartedly supported with their data or evidence, and neither of the approaches can actually say that yes, crime will become nullified or crime will become less whether we adopt the consequentialist approach or whether we adopt the the retributivist approach, whether we are for abolishing or whether we are for or against capital punishment. At the end of the day, what we have to see is that whether the individual, the criminal, is actually deserving of the death penalty or not. And before we go on to decide that, we must examine all aspects of it in the greatest and the minutest of details. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sudhya, for a very, very interesting and insightful discourse on death penalty and punishment and discussing both the sides of the death penalty issue. Thank you so much. Once again, we would like to have you once more.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
पहाड़ों पर जाना किसे पसंद नहीं। इस तरह के पहाड़ तो आपने देखे ही होंगे। चलिए आज आपको विशेष प्रकार के पहाड़ों की सैर कराते हैं। ये हैं कूड़े के पहाड़, जिनके बोझ तले दुनिया दबी जा रही है। इन कूड़े के पहाड़ों में हैं हमारे घरों, कार्यालयों, उद्योगों से निकलने वाली बेकार की वस्तुएं, जैसे इस्तेमाल किया हुआ कागज़, फटे कपड़े, पुरानी लकड़ी, धातु, कांच के सामान, सब्जी फलों के छिलके, पुराने मोबाइल, लैपटॉप इत्यादि। कूड़े के ये पहाड़ न केवल शहरों में बल्कि गांव में भी पाए जाते हैं। अपशिष्ट की बढ़ती हुई मात्रा और इसकी विषैली प्रकृति हमारे पर्यावरण और स्वास्थ्य को नुकसान पहुंचाती है। कभी सोचा है इसका निपटान कैसे होता है, या क्या होता है इन कूड़े के पहाड़ों का? कैसे हम इस समस्या से छुटकारा पा सकते हैं? इन सभी प्रश्नों का उत्तर देने के लिए इंदिरा गांधी राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विश्वविद्यालय अपशिष्ट प्रबंधन में प्रमाण पत्र कार्यक्रम प्रस्तुत करता है। यदि आप नगर निगम में कार्यरत हैं, सैनिटरी इंस्पेक्टर हैं, अपशिष्ट प्रबंधक हैं या अपशिष्ट से जुड़ी हुई परामर्श सेवाएं, अनुसंधान या विकास कार्य करते हैं, तो ये कार्यक्रम आपके लिए सर्वोत्तम है। कार्यक्रम की न्यूनतम योग्यता है 12वीं उत्तीर्ण और इसे 6 महीने में पूरा किया जा सकता है या अधिक से अधिक आप इसे 2 साल के अंतराल पर भी पूरा कर सकते हैं। कार्यक्रम में शामिल है स्व शिक्षण पाठ्यक्रम सामग्री, ऑडियो वीडियो संसाधन और विभिन्न माध्यमों से शिक्षण की सुविधा। तो फिर देर किस बात की, चलिए समस्या का नहीं समाधान का हिस्सा बने। अपशिष्ट प्रबंधन में प्रमाण पत्र कार्यक्रम में दाखिला लें। हम आपके स्वागत के लिए आतुर हैं। अधिक जानकारी के लिए देखें www.ignou.ac.in। धन्यवाद।
Friends and learners, welcome to this session on fundamentals of research. In today's session, we will be discussing about some of the very fundamental concepts which are there in the research process. Then we will also discuss about in detail in the coming sessions about the various smaller concepts which I am going to discuss today. This session is basically for those who are doing the postgraduate diploma in higher education. This is a course offered by the School of Education IGNOU. But at the same time, this is not only limited to the learners or researchers who are doing this program, but the entire scholars or those who are engaged in the research process, all those can make benefit of this session. So as I said, I'll be discussing only some of the very brief smaller ideas which are there in the research process, and in the coming days, in the coming sessions, I'll be discussing in detail the concepts which we discuss today. So to start with, I'll discuss about the very basic definition of research in a broader way. Then, as you know, in each disciplines, in each subject, there are researches going on which have different meanings and definitions. So if you see in a broader perspective, in a broader way, how you will define the concept or the term research. I would invite your attention to the screen. As you see in the screen, a very simple kind of definition which we can give to research is like, this is the systematic attempt to obtain answers to questions, and it can be about any phenomenon or events through the application of scientific method. Let me repeat: systematic attempt to obtain answers to questions about phenomena or events through the application of scientific method. So if you see this definition, 2-3 words which are very prominent, which are very important. One, the first word which you see, that is the systematic. So in a glance you can say this is going to be, the research is going to be a systematic activity. So we will see what all things are there, but I would say research is considered to be a systematic activity, attempt or process also we can say. And why we do those we do those activities, systematic activities, to find answers to questions or issues, we can say like that way also. So we have some questions to be answered, some issues to be solved, some issues which we need to answer. For such questions or issues, we follow a systematic process, systematic activity. Then we will find answers or solutions to that issues or problems. So it can be about any phenomena or it can be any events also. There is no limit to that way. And again you will see another word which is a scientific method. So again friends, this is something which is derived from the discipline of what we say sciences. In sciences, if you have any problem, say for example a very recent problem which is not very recent that way, the COVID. So it was a that way a problem. So we were trying to find out solutions to the spreading of viruses and how those patients who are getting affected with COVID can be cured. So the vaccinations came. So to now come out with vaccination, some kind of scientific method has to be followed. And that's how we come out with vaccinations which can be used across the human beings across the globe. So especially in sciences, science disciplines, they follow, if they have any issue, they follow a particular format, then they will come out with some kind of solutions. This is basically in general, in brief, what the scientific method is about. So let me wind up my what we say the discussion about the definition of research, which as you see in the slide says systematic attempt to obtain answers to questions about phenomena or events through the application of scientific method. Now this definition is very broader in nature. It applies across the disciplines, whether it is social sciences, humanities, arts or any other disciplines, management sciences. And if you are taking the a discipline, say for example, if you are trying to define educational research, which is the research conducted in the discipline of education. So what we do in educational research, we will apply again this definition, and we will say the systematic attempt to obtain answers to questions about phenomena or events which are there in the discipline of education through application of scientific method. So the problems and issues which are there in the discipline of education, we are trying to find out answers to those problems through research. So that way we define educational research. If it is a research in the field of languages, then the problems, issues and whatever are associated with language discipline, such problems or issues are solved, or we are trying to find out some answers to those issues and problems through some systematic activities. So that is going to be the language discipline related research. So altogether we have a broader definition for research which applies across the disciplines, and we have then discipline wise separate definitions for research also, like the way I was discussing about the educational research. So friends, I would, for the time being, I'll stop my discussion about the definition of research. Now I'll invite your attention to the characteristics of research. Now as you see in the slide, see 4 or 5 major characteristics are there. First one, I had already given you a hint on that. It is a systematic activity. It's very systematic, we are identifying the problem, then finding a solution to the problem. So it has to be in a systematic way, otherwise we will not be finding the correct answers or solutions. So that's why, as you see in the slide, it is written, it is systematic. This word, the word systematic, we usually use in the disciplines of, maybe we can say, arts and social sciences. This word, the systematic word, we use another word in the case of science disciplines, that is the scientific. So in science researchers, usually in place of systematic, that word we use this word, the scientific. But again, the process almost remains same, identifying the problem, then finding or coming out with some tentative answers to our problems. Then we are checking the tentative answers, the answers that we have guessed, whether they are right or not. That there is a process for that. So almost this remains the same. So in the discipline of arts and humanities, social sciences, this word will be more suitable, the word systematic, while in the case of sciences, this word, the scientific word, will be more suitable. So this is going to be one characteristic of research, which is there in all the researches that we undertake. The second one, as you see, it is problem oriented. Of course, when we were discussing about the definition of research, we have seen that of course there is a problem, and for this problem the researcher is trying to come out with some answers. They are trying to find out some answers for that particular problem. So it is of course a problem oriented one. It refers to a process. This is another characteristic. Of course, many process we do activities we do during the research. So that's why this is another characteristic of the research. Again, something related, it involves many activities. And finally, the last one is it leads to a solution. So that's why, like when we were discussing about the definition of research, I was saying, we are trying to find out the answers to some, problems. So of course, then the research, at the end of the research, the researcher has to come out with some kind of solutions. So friends, in broad, in a general way, we can say that these are the characteristics. It's not limited to only these 5 points, but maybe we can say when we are trying to, identify some of the major characteristics of a research, then you can put these 5 points into that. Systematic, problem-oriented, it involves activities and processes, and it finally gives some solutions. So now I'll be talking about the steps of research, because often I was saying about this is an activity, this is a process, it includes various activities and procedures. Then it is of course you need to understand the different steps of research. What are the steps which are there in every research? Almost all the research, irrespective of the what we say the subject or discipline, includes all these. The first one is identification of the problem. As I said, the first and the foremost duty of the researcher is to come out with a problem. They need to identify one problem, and for that problem the researcher will be trying to find out, researcher will be finding the answers. In research, if you see, search for another word for problem, you can see variable is another, word which you can use in place of problem. So it can be like identification of the problem or identification of the variable. Say for example, let me make it very brief and simple. Like, attitude. Now during the COVID times, most of the educational institutions were using the technologies for the teaching learning activities. So how the students, behave, or what is their attitude towards technology used in the teaching learning process during pandemic can be a variable. Attitude towards technology, so that can be a variable attitude. Then technology, that can be considered as a variable. So as a researcher, your duty is to find out a problem or a variable which you are going to do some rigorous kind of research, and finally you have to come out with some answers for that. So that's why in the slide you are seeing identification of the problem or variable. The next task of the researcher is to come out with a title. Maybe in the beginning it seems to be little tough, but you have to come out with a title. At a later point, if you feel this is not suitable, little modifications can be made on the title. But if you talk about the steps, identify the problem, then you come out with your title. Once that is done, you have to generate your objectives. So friends, as I said in the beginning, how you will write the objective of your research. This is something which needs more discussion, which we will be taking up at a later session. Again, the next objectives, writing objectives or research question, that requires more elaboration, which we will be discussing at a later point in a later session. So variable, identify the variable, then write the title, write the objectives. In place of objectives, sometimes researchers also use the word questions. So you write either objectives or questions, both remains the same, doesn't make, but the way it is written, objectives and questions, they are different. So that is the third. Now, after finding or writing your objectives, the next task is formulation of hypothesis. Now see, say for example, what is this hypothesis? Again, this requires more discussion. We will be doing that later. Let me make it very brief. Say for example, if the mobile device or the computer device which I am using, if it is not working on a particular day, then as the owner of this device, I would be making some kind of a answers. This mobile or desktop is not working because it can be due to the failure of electricity. There can have some issues with the connecting wires, or there can have some issues with the software installed on the device. These are some of the tentative answers or solutions which as a owner I am making. So such tentative answers or tentative solutions which I make as a researcher, they are termed to be hypotheses. So the next task of the researcher is to formulate the hypothesis, which is optional step, as you see in the slide. This is not required in all the educational researches or all the researchers. After formulating the hypothesis, your next task is to find whether the hypothesis that you have formulated is right or wrong, whether you have to accept or reject that hypothesis. The word reject is not used in the research process, which we will discuss at a later session. So after forming the hypothesis, next is data collection. During data collection, you will see what kind of a methodology, how you will collect the data. That has to be specified. You have to mention about the population and samples, which is again a different topic. What is population and sample? But again, you have to collect data from a population, but collecting data from population is not possible all the time, because population is all the time a big number. Say for example, if I am researching on 10th class students studying across the country, this is going to be in crores. So as a researcher, it is a tough time for me to collect data from the entire population. So I'll select as a representative part of that population. That representative portion of population is termed to be samples. So how you will select samples for your research work, that is going to be another point for discussion. But again, this is the step in the process of research. So you will identify the samples through some sampling techniques. Then you will apply the tools or research instruments on those tools for collecting data. And as you see in the slide, tools and instrument. Tools are used in social sciences, while instruments are more suitable in the case of what we say science subjects. So methodology, the way you are collecting data, then your population and samples, then your tools, and after collecting the data, the next task of the researcher is to analyze this data, for which various statistical methods are there, statistical tools are there that we will apply. Then we will come out with some kind of a conclusion. So that is going to be the final. You make a conclusion, then you report for further researchers or for the benefit of the entire population. So friends, this is in brief. Many of the steps which you are seeing on the slide requires more discussion, which we will be doing it in a later session. In general, these are the steps. Identify the problem or variable, write the title, write the objectives or research questions, formulate, come out with hypothesis, do the data collection, then analyze the data and make some kind of a conclusion for the data that you have collected. I hope you have understood the in brief the steps included in research. Now I'll be talking about the different types of research. This also, as a researcher, you should understand the various types of research studies which are there, because this would help you to select the research which you like to do at a later point in your during your course of studies. So as you see there are different categories or different types of research. One categorization, one type of research, as you see on the slide, you will get this categorization is based on the data that you collect, and based on the data or information, type of information that you collect, this is classified into qualitative and quantitative. Say for example, I am researching on something on the National Education Policy document 2020. So I have to read the document. Primarily I am doing some kind of a content analysis of that document. So the data which I have is that document which is in text form, non-numerical form. So such data, if you are collecting such data, or if you are interviewing somebody, they will give verbal explanations. So that is also a verbal kind of a data, text kind of a data. So such data is qualitative research. Any research which primarily focus on the data which are verbal in nature, such research studies are qualitative. If you collect a number form of data, say for example the achievement of the school students, then the achievement, the marks they scored will come in quantitative number form. So such research studies where you focus on the data in the form of numbers, such research studies are quantitative research. So this is one classification. The second classification is based on the method or procedure followed, as you see in the slide. See, we take research studies on the vision of people, vision of some organization, etc. Say for example, there is an educational institution, they have some vision. So if any researcher is researching on the vision of that organization or any individual, such research studies are classified into philosophical research method. Then we study about the past events, the education system of our country. Such studies are historical research studies, historical researchers. Then we do research on the present situation, present information. Say for example, the achievement of the students in the examinations, in the recent examination. So the research studies which focus on the present situations, present data, then that is put into survey. You might have seen various surveys. The government also conduct various surveys. Survey of the various households. There are many such surveys. So that purely collect data on the present day activities. And they are again classified into exploratory survey, descriptive survey, correlational survey, etc. So that is another. Then we do research on the things which can happen in future. Such research studies are experimental research studies. Say for example, we are coming out with a new method of teaching, whether that will improve the achievement of the students. That is something which we cannot predict. So we do research, then we make a conclusion that the new teaching method that we have used can improve the academic achievement of the students. So that is the next type, which is the experimental. Then there are some special cases everywhere. If you see, if you take a classroom, say for example in the case of educational research, in a classroom there are some students who scores all the time maybe 99% or 100% of the marks in all the examinations. So there are some special cases. So some students come all the way late in the classrooms, so they are considered to be special cases. So if you are researching on such special cases, that is going to be a case study research. So this classification is based on the method or procedure that we follow in research: philosophical, historical, survey, experimental, and case study. Now I would invite your attention to the another type of research, which is based on the applicability. There are some research studies who research on developing some theories, some fundamental ideas. So then you can see such research studies are termed to be basic research studies or fundamental or theoretical research. So the basic focus will be coming out or generating some kind of what we say the research theories. Now once that is done, the research theories are developed or new theories are developed. Say for example in the case of science law of gravitation, such theories we will use and find its implications on some other factors. So that is applied on some situations. So such research studies he is coming under applied or experimental research. Now there are some research studies which require some immediate attention. Say for example, I am a teacher, I am teaching some students. In all the classrooms, if I teach, students may not be listening. So as a teacher, I may feel like this is a issue. So I'll be taking a small research study and will come out with some kind of a conclusions why the students are not listening my classrooms. So this is the third category, action research. So based on applicability, there are three: basic, applied, and action research. So friends, with this I would wind up this session. In today's session, I hope you have understood some of the basics, concepts, basic ideas about the research. We started with the definition of the research, then we have talked something about the characteristics, then we have discussed the steps, then at the end we have discussed the types of research studies. I hope you have understood the concepts that we have discussed. Thank you for listening this lecture.
Do you wish to be part of a television studio like this, or any other media system, or already part of any media system, want to enhance a new set of skills? Welcome to School of Journalism New Media Studies. Here in the School of Journalism New Media Studies, we are offering program for all set of people to learn and enhance the media skills. The vision of School of Journalism and New Media Studies is to generate a new set of professionals in the area of media and communication studies with understanding about role of media in the national development and global understanding. We offer innovative programs in the field of journalism and mass communication that sets the benchmark of high quality learning and teaching process at the national level. We offer these programs across the country with the help of our regional network as well as study center. Same manner, many of our programs are offered through online mode with a sophisticated learning management system. SOGNMS offers programs from PhD in journalism and mass communication till certificate level. We have masters in journalism and mass communication. The eligibility is a bachelor's degree, and we are introducing this program in 3 languages: Hindi, Tamil and English. Students from national and international students can join either through online mode as well as in the distance mode. We have 4 postgraduate diploma programs, specialized areas in the field of development communication, digital media, electronic media, and journalism and mass communication program. And all these 4 programs are available in distance mode. 2 programs are available in online mode, development communication and digital media. And we have specialized certificate program in community radio. IGNOU employs various media and communication tools for better teaching and learning process. School of Journalism and New Media Studies utilizes this media system for delivering all our programs. Come and join with us for exploring a new career and enhance your media skills.
Namaskar. First of all, I would like to welcome you all the viewers and listeners and students. Today our topic is concept, scope, importance of watershed management. This is basically a unit 2 of course 1, that is BNRI 101 of Diploma in Watershed Management program. In previous unit, yani unit 1, we have discussed the importance of watershed management, definition, then principles, benefits, and evolution of watershed management, its history, and different components of watershed management has also been discussed in unit 1. So today we are going to talk about role of watershed management, concept of watershed management, major watershed characteristics, then criteria for selection of watersheds, then integrated watershed management, and importance of institutional arrangements. In previous unit, we have discussed about the importance and principles of watershed management. We all know about 2/3 country's population reside in rural areas and their livelihood mainly depend on agriculture. Agriculture is the backbone of the country, and the agriculture is mainly depend on the vagary of weather, or you can say monsoon, which is highly unpredictable and you can say variable with respect to time and space. Rainfall agriculture is highly depend on water, that is rainfall, and almost 2/3 cultivated area of the country is still rain fed, which depend on rain, and 1/3 is under assured irrigation. The almost 35% of the grain production is come from the rain-fed agriculture, whereas almost 45% of the grain production is come from this rain-fed agriculture, and as well as 55% of grain production comes from this 35% of the cultivated area, which is come under assured irrigation. So this rain-fed agriculture is confronted with the problem of low agriculture productivity. We can solve this problem by adopting the watershed management approach. Means the rain-fed farming should be developed as a sustainable productive system by adopting watershed management approach to increase the food grain production with available limited land and water resources. The integrated watershed management is the most important thing to provide or sustain the livelihoods of the rural people. Basically, it includes the different components of or with different activities like agroforestry, like horticulture, like sericulture, like apiculture, animal husbandry, and other like lake culture, pearl culture, etc. The institutional arrangement at different levels, at central level, state level, district level, and you can say at project level agencies, including Panchayati Raj institutions, are most important for effective implementation of these watershed programs or projects. Watershed development and management is based on participatory rural appraisal for ensuring active involvement of watershed beneficiaries at different levels, that may be planning, monitoring, execution, evaluation, and post project maintenance of the created assets of the watershed. The bottom up approach instead of top down approach is adopted to ensure people participation at planning stage, designing stage, and implementation of various watershed projects or watershed activities for successful implementation of watershed development programs. So this is the most important thing, that watershed management should be adopted to provide or to generate employment, to generate or enhance the income of the rural people or the watershed beneficiaries, those who are landless, those who are labor, to enhance their income, their livelihood opportunities, and support them. So why watershed? What is watershed? A watershed is a hydrological unit, that is physical, biological, or socio-economic political unit used for planning and management of natural resources to increase productivity, generate employment, overall socio-economic development, and consequently the well-being of the people. Means those peoples are living, or those are the watershed beneficiaries, to improve their socio-economic conditions. The watershed management is the most important thing. The main aim of the watershed is the optimal utilization of natural resources, which is soil, water, and vegetation, etc., for long-term sustainability. The main objective of watershed management is judicious use of land, controlling and managing the floods, developing water resources for meeting the growing demand of different sectors, and minimizing land, water, and air pollution. So this is the most important thing for that watershed is required. When we are talking about the components of watershed management, it involves the major two components. One is engineering and biological practices, another one is improved production practices. The first, engineering and biological practices, basically engineering and biological practices for soil and water management or soil or water conservation are cost intensive, means it is very costly, and for that we need government support. So government is implementing different watershed management programs in which engineering and biological practices are applicable. For land management, the main component are land management. These practices includes land management, water management, and biomass management. We discuss in detail what is land management, what is water management, what is biomass generation. When we talk about the land management practices, we all know for agriculture sustainability, land and water management are the most important natural resources. We all know the upper soil layer is the most important for agriculture production because it has the nutrients for plant growth. The upper soil layer needs to be protected and conserved so that we can sustain our plant, we can sustain our crop, and we can get the good agriculture production. So appropriate measures need to be undertaken in order to control soil erosion depending upon the soil characteristic, topography, climate, and rainfall pattern to maintain soil productivity. Means we must ensure that soil erosion must be controlled and we can sustain our agriculture production. The biological or agronomic measures have proved to be effective for controlling both wind and water erosion by employing the agronomic practices like conservation tillage, like contour cultivation, cultivation on contours, like strip cropping, and like vegetative barriers. When we are growing different vegetations on the barrier of contours, we can control soil erosion by reducing the velocity of flowing water. We can you can say conserve water, conserve soil. We can harvest the water, and that can be used for irrigation purposes or for other purposes. Like that, land management practices. Basically, depending on the land characteristic, mechanical measures are included, or these include a wide variety of conservation practices and structures that may be contour bunds, graded bunds, earthen bunds, contour terraces, contour trenches, bench terraces, channel walls, stream bank stabilization, check dams, gully plugging. Basically, these are the engineering measures which control soil erosion, which maintain, you can say, the level of water. Through these measures, we can recharge groundwater, we conserve or you can say protect our productive soil, or we can sustain our agriculture by adopting these land management practices, mechanical measures. Then water management practices. We all know only 4% available water in India. We have only 4% water resources to support almost 16% of the world population, and we have very limited water resources, and the population is very high, or it is continuously increasing. So we have to manage this limited water resources. The mismanagement of restricted water resources result in occurring floods and droughts. Means when I have talked about our rainfall is highly variable with respect to time and space. So we have to manage this important natural resource. Irrigation is the biggest user of fresh water, but its share is continuously decreasing. Almost 70% of the fresh water is used in agriculture, and you can say because population is increasing, demand of other sector is continuously increasing. So the share of fresh water, the share of water in agriculture sector is continuously decreasing, whereas the demand for food grain is continuously increasing. So we have to find out the ways through which we can save this important natural resource, and we can conserve this important natural resource for long-term sustainability. We are continuously over-exploiting our groundwater resources, through which the groundwater table is continuously declining. The day by day groundwater level is going down. So we have to adopt the rainwater conservation, rainwater harvesting practices in our this. So overexploitation of groundwater has led to its rapid depletion and deterioration of water quality. Therefore, it is imperative that the natural resource is managed in the most optimal way in order to meet its growing demand. Otherwise, the days are come when we are facing a big problem of water for each and every sector, including agriculture. The rainwater harvesting is the most important practice, and that can play an important role not only in augmenting these declining natural resources, but also helps in long-term agriculture sustainability or long-term sustainability of each and every sector. When we talk about biomass management practices, the main aspects for ensuring biomass management includes forest management and conservation. We have to conserve our forest in terms of, you can say, food, fodder, and everything. Then social forestry, we must adopt the social forestry, means you can say eco preservation and enhancing animal productivity, because we are getting good amount of fodder from the forest for animals. Then when we talk about the watershed characteristics, each and every watershed has a distinct characteristics, and therefore one watershed is not identical to the others. Means it is the size, shape, length is different for each and every watershed, and the main characteristic of watershed management are size, shape, slope, length, drainage area, and drainage density. Based on these characteristics, we can differentiate the watershed, and we can identify the watershed. We will discuss each and every characteristic in detail. When we talk about the size of watershed may vary from few square kilometers to the 1,000 square kilometers, depending upon the time and money available for its development. For when we have a limited resources, we choose a small watershed. When we have a good amount for development of watershed, we can select a big watershed. The size of watershed will also depend on major components of the development, such as afforestation, then grassland development, then agriculture, etc. Based on these, the activities we are planning, the size of watershed also varies. Suppose large watershed could be selected in the plain valley areas, or where grassland and forest development may be the major objectives. If you can say grassland and forest development is the main objective, we can select a big watershed. The size of watershed would be small for hilly areas or where intensive agriculture development is required. In those areas, we select a small watershed. Like that, shape of watershed, based on the morphological parameters like geology and structures, watershed may be identified or infinite varieties of shapes, such as pier, elongated, triangular, or circular, etc. It determines the length width ratio, which affect the runoff characteristic like runoff time. The main important factor which watershed characteristic define is the runoff. Runoff is the excess water which flow over the surface or below the surface, is known as runoff. When we talk about the shape of the watershed, a circular watershed would result in runoff from various parts of the watershed reaching the outlet at the same time. However, an elliptical watershed having the outlet at one end of the major axis and having the same area as the circular watershed would cause the runoff to be spread over the time, or you can say thus producing a small flood or small quantity of runoff than that of the circular watershed. And then when we talk about the shape factor, it is equal to LS, which is the multiple of, you can say, length of the center of the area in kilometers and length of the watershed in kilometers. Basically, the shape factor is reflects the peak discharge which increase with the decrease in length. When length of the watershed decreases, the peak discharge increases. The next characteristic is the slope of the watershed. The flood magnitude reflects the momentum of the runoff. The slope is an important factor in the momentum. The watershed slope reflects the rate of discharge, rate of change of elevation with respect to the distance along the principal flow path. Means you can say watershed slope is computed as the difference in elevation between the end point of the principal flow path divided by the hydrologic length of the flow path. So this is the important characteristic of watershed. Then length of the watershed. Basically, length of watershed is an important hydrologic computation. Is most important for required for hydrologic computations. It is defined as the distance measured along the main channel from the watershed outlet to the basin divide, or runoff volume increase with the length. When length increases, the quantity or the amount of runoff volume will increase. The drainage density is used to indicate the potential for runoff to provide a volume of water. The drainage density, drainage area, we will discuss in the coming slide. The drainage area, basically the drainage area is the probably the single most important watershed characteristic for hydrologic design, as it reflects the volume of runoff or volume of water that can be generated from the rainfall. As I have already told, the runoff generated from a watershed is mainly depend on the length of the watershed or drainage area of the watershed. A constant depth of rainfall occurring uniformly over the watershed is assumed in hydrologic design. Means when we talk about the hydrologic design, the uniform occurrence of rainfall is the most important thing. The volume of water available for runoff is the product of rainfall depth and the drainage area. When we talk about the drainage density, it is the most important watershed characteristic. Basically, drainage density is an important characteristic of the watershed which influence runoff. It can be defined as the ratio of total length of all stream to the total catchment area of the watershed. This can be easily explained with this equation. Drainage density is the total length of all streams in kilometer divided by the total catchment area of the watershed, that is in kilometer squares. High drainage density drains resulted in faster runoff and increase the peak of hydrograph. Means hydrograph basically a graph which describe the runoff in terms of with respect to time. So this is the most important thing which can describe the characteristic of watershed. When we are talking about the selection of criteria for selection of watershed, this is the most important thing when we are selecting a watershed for different activities. What are the different criteria? The most important criteria for watershed selection is you can say watershed need to be selected very carefully so that the natural resources are optimally developed and used for enhancing agricultural productivity, or you can say generate employment and consequently improve the socio-economic conditions of the region with the active participation of the beneficiaries. Means we have to involve all beneficiaries or all watershed beneficiaries at different stages, that may be planning, designing, development, or you can say at monitoring, evaluation at each and every stage. even after completion of the project, we must include the beneficiaries of the watershed. Then most important thing, the integrated watershed management. What is integrated watershed management? Integrated watershed management is important for holistic development of the livelihood of the watershed beneficiaries. It includes, or you can say it is an approach for sustainable use of natural resources vis-a-vis land, water, vegetation, livestock, fisheries and human resources. Basically, we have to follow the integrated farming system approach, in which we have to involve agroforestry system, horticulture system, then you can say silvipasture, aquaculture, animal husbandry, apiculture, sericulture, lake culture, and you can say nowadays the pearl culture. These all things must be included, so that, or you can say uh, we can help the watershed beneficiaries in generating their employment, their income, so that their living standards can be increased, and they can, their socio-economic conditions can be improved. So this ensures full utilization of resources for employment generation and overall development of the watershed area, vis-a-vis the socio-economic development of the peoples living in that area. This is the most important activity, and this is a holistic approach through which we can sustain the livelihood of the rural peoples. Then institutional arrangement. Institutional arrangement is the most important thing, because the government machinery is involved in implementation of watershed programs. So for effective and efficient implementation of the watershed development programs, this is an institutional arrangement. At different levels, institutional arrangement is there. At national level, National Rainfed Area Authority, NRAA, is there to support these watershed programs. At a state level nodal agency is there. At district level, District Watershed Development Unit is there to support the watershed activities. Then at Panchayati Raj institutions are there, then Project Implementing Agency at project level, then Watershed Development Team. The Project Implementing Agency along with Watershed Development Team are the work at grassroots level to implement these programs effectively. When I'm going to conclude today's presentation, when we sum up, it is the most important thing that rain-fed agriculture need to be developed as a sustainable productive system to increase food production with available limited water resources by adopting watershed management approach. Engineering and biological practices for land, water and biomass management are essential for uncultivated lands. The improved production practices can play an important role for improving the agriculture productivity in arable lands by in situ water conservation practices, improved cropping system and varieties. Each watershed has a distinct characteristics and therefore need to be considered independently for watershed management. When we talk about the institutional arrangement, institutional arrangement at central, state, district, village and project level agencies, including Panchayati Raj institutions, are paramount important for effective management of watershed development projects. This is all about today's talk. So thank you.